Welcome back to Music 101. We're going to be looking at chapter 33 today, which is talking about Beethoven and the classical sonata. So, remember we talked about sonata in the Baroque era, and a sonata is an instrumental work for one instrument, a solo instrument, or two instruments. So it's a very, very small chamber music form of music. It usually has 3 or 4 contrasting movements, so it's a multi-movement cycle. So Bach had solo sonata works for the violin, and Mozart and Beethoven came and expanded that with their multi-movement cycles here. There was multi-movements with Bach as well, but they're expanding it and changing it. It was more intimate in expression because there was only 2 instruments or 1 instrument with the conversation, so it could be from different voices with a solo instrument, or it is between conversation between 2 instruments. Mozart and Beethoven were the most significant composers. So we have young Beethoven performing before Mozart, and it is record saying that Mozart was very impressed with Beethoven and basically told him that he was going to go far in music, and Beethoven did. So the classical era sonata was a very important genre for amateurs and were performed in the home. These were concert works for composer and performers, as well as showpieces. So it was kind of like a concerto where it kind of shows off the virtuosic nature of an instrument, but it wasn't accompanied by an orchestra, and it was usually it wasn't quite as virtuosic as the concerto, so a little bit easier for amateurs and performing at home. So Beethoven was born in 1770 and he died in 1827. He was born in Bonn, Germany, and at the age of 11, he was supporting his mother and brothers with his music and performing. At age 22, he moved to Vienna, and this is a picture of the countess that he dedicated his famous Moonlight Sonata to, so we're going to get to that in just a second. He worked underneath a modified patronage system, and he taught aristocrats as well as worked for commissions and concertized and published his works. And Beethoven is known mainly for his progressive hearing loss. Beethoven's music were expert in large scale forms, so there was a lot of stepwise motion, so running stepwise through the music. He loved pushing formal conventions. So remember, we have these people that took and pushed the envelopes and changed music so that we can have music today. And if we didn't have those people, like in the future with Michael Jackson and Lady Gaga and people like that in today's society, we wouldn't have those people if we didn't have Beethoven, who was willing to change conventions. So his compositions can be chopped up into 3 periods. The first one would kind of reflect more of the classical period of Haydn and Mozart. This is a picture of Beethoven. The second was a strong dynamic contrast, explosive accents, longer movements, and this is mainly dealing with his deafness. And then the third, which was moving towards the Romantic period. Beethoven is a bridge composer. A lot of people classify him as a classical composer, and a lot of people classify him as a Romantic composer as we move on to the Romantic period. He's kind of in between. So his first set of music in his early life was more classical. Second was mainly composed during him trying to understand his deafness and trying to overcome that. And then the third one is sounding more like Romantic music. He had orchestral music, 9 symphonies, several concertos, 32 piano sonatas, as well as chamber music and string quartets, 1 opera, as well as choral music. His most famous sonata is the famous Moonlight Sonata, and we listened to it. I don't think there's a person alive that hasn't heard it. And this is during the first style period, so this is more of a classical example of his sonata. And it was titled by a German poet talking about the moonlight scenery on this beautiful lake in Switzerland. It's also known as the Fantasy Sonata, or Sonata quasi in Fantasia. It is split into 3 movements. We have the dreamy first movement, the second movement, which is a gentle scherzo. Remember, scherzo is a joke, in a major key, And then we have this stormy finale. It's also very famous as well, but most people know the first movement with dramatic writing, and it's also in sonata allegro form. It evokes emotional expressiveness of the Romantic era, and surely Beethoven did not particularly like this piece of music, and it is probably one of the most continued audience favorites. So he felt like that he had written better, but it's been a fan fave since then. So we're going to listen to the Moonlight Sonata, and you can kind of, if you want to follow along, you can find it on page 194, and you can kind of find these little things that we're talking about. Now, sometimes in music we use different words, which I've still to this day don't understand why. We're just going to call them sections. There is a formal word for it, but I don't want you to really worry about it. Where we have an introduction, then we have the first theme, which is introduced, and then, oh, I guess it might be because it's German, but anyway. Then the melody is expanded and modulated into a new key, and then a new idea, which we have a dialogue in between the two hands. So the right hand would be like ding da da, and the left hand ding da da, and then the melody returns in the higher range. So we're going to listen to that first movement here. I don't know why this is so low. Let's see, we might have to go through the listen for. If anything, I can find it.
Here's what to listen for in the first movement of Beethoven's Piano Sonata in C sharp minor, Opus 27, number 2, Moonlight. As you listen to this movement, you'll hear two musical features throughout. The dynamic, or volume, is always soft, the minor key, and the accompaniment always features arpeggiated chords, or chords played one note at a time instead of all of the notes together. As you listen to different excerpts, listen for the quiet dynamic, the minor key, and the arpeggiated accompaniment. Listen to the beginning of the first strophe.
Or phrase. It's really hard to hear. Let's go over to YouTube. I'm going to pull that up for you. There's also a really great movie about Beethoven's life. You can look up Immortal Beloved. It's a really, really great movie about his life.
Tyler!
Sorry, ad.
Check to see if badgers are dangerous.
It says you're fine. Wait, I accidentally typed bagels.
Built-in Wi-Fi and the all-new, most tech-savvy Subaru Forester ever.
Sorry. Okay, here we go. So we have the arpeggiated accompaniment. It's also pianissimo, highlighting the new pianoforte. And it's a sad minor key. So the melody just came in. Modulate to a different key. So that's the dialogue between the two hands. You have it in the right hand here. Left hand. All with that arpeggiated accompaniment, which is very difficult. So this would be the first section, or kind of like the A section. And we're getting to this middle, like the development kind of, sort of. Then he returns to the beginning. So recap to the beginning. Once you get to the coda. So the coda's here. So a little tiny snippet of the melody. So totally different tonality from Mozart. Completely different. It's starting to inch towards that chromaticism, adding notes that don't go in the key that you get in romantic music. And the last movement. Here's the last movement. It's very stormy. So notice the dynamic contrast. So much more forte this time. Repeated the melody. And you get the ideas. You can listen to the rest of the sonata if you go to your listening guide. It's really, really hard to hear, so definitely go back and check that out. So we'll be continuing on with Beethoven, and we'll be talking about the symphony in the next lecture.